Welcome to another edition of our War and College Counseling Agenda. This week, we are thrilled to have two absolutely special guests. One of our guests, he comes all the way from the state of Tennessee in the United States of America, and it is Mr. Chris. Thank you. Welcome to Chris.
Glad to be here, Michael.
Our other guest is another amazing college counselor, skilled and experienced, coming from the great village of Der de Buen, Naveen. Welcome to Chris and Naveen. Thank you for joining the show. It is always special to have lovely guests, but Chris and Naveen really are extremely special. So thank you for joining us today. We have a really, I think, both interesting and very useful show in store for our bridge students on this week's episode. So take out your notebooks, have them on your side, because you're going to hear a lot of useful information. And also, when you're done watching this, please fill out the survey to share your questions and sign up for a Q&A session to join me, Chris, and Naveen live to get to ask all your questions. So our goal for today's show is that by the end of it, you will be ready to do your own college research to make your first draft of your college list. And there's basically two steps. One is to understand the criteria, what guides you in doing your research, which is basically your profile, which we've been working on all the last year and a half. And then the second part is how to do the research, how to find the information, how to use our website, as well as Google, and to find all the information you need to know. So before we start showing you things, I just wanted to ask our skilled and experienced guests to share a little bit from their background. So first, Chris, you've been a college counselor for, I think, maybe 4 or 5, maybe 75 years, I think. And so can you share with us what are two important personality characteristics that are necessary to be a strong college, to be a student, for a student to do well in their college counseling, their college research? What do you think they need?
Thanks, Michael. Glad to be here. The first thing that I believe that students who are prepared to enter the college process have to be is responsible. What that means is that this is their process. Everything that they do in the application, their writing, their test scores, their grades, who they are, it's all them. I think everybody on this call and everybody in their lives will help guide their path, but they're the only ones who can walk it. So that responsibility is key. And then the other thing that I think makes really strong students in college counseling is being proactive, meeting deadlines. Sometimes it's going to seem like in the middle of a college process that the small things, the dotting the I's, the crossing the T's, literally the editing of the personal statements, or maybe just that last few hours of studying on English just don't seem to matter, but they really do. They add up over time, and meeting those deadlines, even when they're 2, 3, 4, 5 months in advance, is really important. If you let them build up, you're going to get to September, October, November, December, and feel like the whole world is crashing on you. So I think those two things, being responsible and being proactive, are the most important.
Okay, we heard it here. Responsible and proactive. Very important. Thank you, Chris, for offering your many years of experience. I want to ask Naveen a question as well. You know, Naveen was the college counselor for the first bridge cohort, so she has the most relevant and important experience for all of our bridge students in the second cohort now. So Naveen, could you share some big ideas, some tips as well for what our students need to have in mind?
Okay, thanks, Michael. So similar to their personal statement experience, this is similar in the sense that it's hard. It's not easy. It's going to take a lot of time. And so, exactly like what Chris said, they need to be responsible. They need to be committed. They need to take this very seriously. The college list is going to take time, and so they need to be focused. And it's important for them to know that it's not easy to get accepted with funding, and so that's why it's very important to prepare a strong and solid list. The list is going to be our key, technically, for the next few months until we start submitting their application. So I know that we'll get into this and we'll get into more details as to what will the college list look like, but we will have the main key elements such as their GPA, what tests do the universities need for them to get in, how to build their story, for example, like the different questions that the application will have. Do they have supplementary essays or they don't? Minimum stat score that they'll take. Some don't even take SAT scores. And so there's a lot of things that the list will include, which means, and what makes the search for universities even harder. There's going to be a lot of different elements that we'll be researching, and each university has its own website and its own way of how they present the information. So just because University of Tennessee has one way of presenting the data doesn't mean it's the same thing in University of Toronto or something like that. So that's something that's important for them to know. Another thing is that we will be applying to at least 12 universities. Because like I said, it's not easy to get into universities with scholarships and with funding. So to be on the safe side, we're going to prepare universities, we're going to prepare a list with 12 universities so we can have a range of state schools, which means that we feel pretty confident that we have the quality. And then we'll have match schools, which means that our qualifications match the university is looking for, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we're pretty confident about getting accepted. And also we're going to have our schools, which means that these are really competitive schools. Their percentage of acceptance rate is not very high, and so it's going to be hard. And obviously there's no guarantees as to where we can get it, even if we match, even if we have a safe option, it's not guaranteed, and it's not guaranteed that we'll get funding. So this is why this is extremely important. It's very serious. It needs a lot of commitment. They also personal statements. I'm really proud of them doing that. But now,
Well, Naveen, we're going to cut you off there. Sorry, because the audio isn't, we started to lose you. But Naveen just offered a bunch of gems for us. Some real gold that have for us to learn from as we go into this process. And she reminded me of all the aspects of our profile that all the students have been developing this year: your GPA, your test scores, SAT and IELTS, your leadership experiences with your activities and your CV, and you're telling your story and your personal statement. So all of these will be critical. And as Naveen said, we'll be having a long list of at least 12 universities to be able to give yourself the best chance. Now, I want to ask myself a question, which I'm curious about. What happened to the website? We had a website, right, for Bridge? Yes, we do have a website. It is called, I'm going to give you a little demo of it, studyabroad.ps. Woo! Woo! This is our website. It now has over 300 universities populated on the website, which Chris and Naveen researched and put together a huge list of universities that historically have been possible places for Palestinian students to go and get scholarship. So the way we broke down the list, you'll see you'll come right to a search page. It looks like this. If you click search, you go into the search area. There's a map, and then there's also some criteria that you can search by. Now, one of the main ways we organized this was based on the minimum SAT score. So the numbers you see here, SAT 1000, SAT 1050, SAT 1100, SAT 1150. If you click, for example, if I scored, if I'm averaging a 1200 on my SAT, then maybe I can search all the universities that have up to a minimum of 1250, for example. The minimum means that the 25% of the students, the bottom 25% of the students are scoring up to a 1250. So it's at the low end of who gets accepted. But since you all are going to be international students, there's a chance that you can get in on the low end. So you don't have to have one of the higher end scores to gain acceptance. So this is why we organized it this way. So if I'm scoring about a 1250, I probably eliminate all of these. I'll leave my 1250, 1200, 1150, 1100, and then maybe I'll stop there and then take off. And now I can see, okay, what universities would be in this range from 1100 to 1150 to 1200? Boom, 92 universities matched. And so now I can go through and start looking at each of these and think, okay, based on location, based on type of university, what am I interested in? But it narrows it down a little bit. Or if you're saying, I have a lower SAT score and I'm thinking I want to go somewhere where SAT is not required, there's a no SAT requirement, and that gives you a whole lot of matches which open up some opportunities that don't require SAT. So this will be, a way for you to start your research process. If you click on a page, it's not going to tell you everything about the university, but it will give you some basics. Usually you get a little picture, you get the logo, you can click here and open the website of the university. It tells you if they do need aware or need blind or scholarship available. Sometimes it gives you a summary of some basic things about the university, the tuition, SAT score range, which just to emphasize, so the bottom here, the minimum range is at 1230. Some students internationally could get in with even lower than the minimum. That's possible. So you don't need to completely eliminate an option if you fall a little below the minimum, but it makes you obviously more competitive if you're within the range. GPA is also listed, and then if there are IELTS and TOEFL minimum scores are listed. And from here, this is a start to your research. And from there, we're going to show you during this time how do we go into even more detail. But this will be the place you'll begin. Will be our website where you can search based on your SAT score, also based on region. Like if you want to go to Europe or to the US or stay in the Middle East or etc., you can search based on region as well. Okay, this is our website. We'll look more at it in a moment. Now I think what I'd like to do is turn some attention to the college list. And I think maybe I'll start with Chris, our guest, Mr. Chris here, and he'll show us our college list document and then some of the research he did.
Yeah, thanks for that, Michael. I think when I think about the college list, I think about three things. First, I think about why do we have a list? Second, I think about how do I start making my list? What are the criteria? And then the third thing that I think about is how do I fill it out? Like, what are the steps to do it? And so I think we should, or I'd like to take some time to do that with y'all's help. I'm going through the list. The first thing that comes to mind is why do we have a college list? A college list doesn't answer all your questions. It doesn't make the decisions for you. But it does help you start a very strong conversation around all of the questions that you're asking. You might be asking about scholarship. You might be asking about admission. You might be asking about a region. What does it offer? What am I going to study? Just everything you can think about in terms of college. Those conversations are really complicated. There's no black and white answer. There's no clear solution to those things. But a college list helps that conversation to start because you have the truth on the page. That's why we start with it, but that's not the end of the college process. After you make your college list, we're going to have a meeting and talk through those options. So you might be thinking, like, how do I start my college list? And as you've been working with Michael, you've been talking about building your profile. And I'm going to share my screen here. I have built a profile myself.
Can I interject for a moment?
Yeah, for sure.
So before Chris shows us his profile, I just want to show you guys the general document. This document is called College List. It has 4 tabs. The first tab is My Profile, which Chris is going to show you his in a moment. You're going to edit this and fill this in for yourself. The next tab is Definitions, which has some definitions that you can reference. The third tab has Research, which explains how to do research, which Chris is going to show us and talk about, as well as Naveen. And then fourth is, again, where you're going to fill in your own list. So the all caps tabs, My Profile and My List, is where you're going to edit. The other 2 tabs have information and guidance. And the first thing you'll do when you open this, which you can do right now on this call, you can pause the video and do this, is at the top of this page, click File, like we've done a million times, make a copy, rename it as with your name, and then College List, and college content folder, so that for the rest of this time you can be editing your own and adding some things in. So you can pause the show and do that. And now I'll pass it back to Chris so he can show us his example.
Should we act like we're paused? Oh, okay.
That was a quick pause. Very brief pause.
All right. Yeah, I'm going to view my profile. Thanks for doing that. If you haven't seen it yet, this is what a profile might look like if you filled it out. So I'm going to the top. I've made this is my example college list. This is the first tab. It says My Profile. The first thing you're going to fill out under My Profile is your GPA. There are many ways to do this. You can click on the link right there. It'll show you how to calculate it. One thing about GPA is colleges will do this, but you need to know what they're going to see. Sometimes it might be higher, sometimes it might be lower based on the college, but you want to know what generally they're going to see. When I graduated, I had mostly A's and B's, and that's mostly A's and B's is mostly A's and B's and a couple C's. But most of the time, I was in the average grades around a 3.8 to 3.9. So I put a 3.85 as my average GPA. The second thing you're going to fill out.
Chris, do you have proof of this?
I need to go. Is this like a birth certificate question?
Just asking for proof.
The second thing moving on, the second thing you're going to fill out is.
Sorry, Chris, do you mind if I add something to that?
Yeah.
Just that most likely universities will be asking for 9th, 10th, and 11th grade, sometimes 10th, 11th, 12th grade. So those are the GPAs that we care most about.
Yeah,
okay.
That's completely right. In fact, in the US, they'll ask for 9th, 10th, 11th, and then 12th grade as much as you have. Oftentimes, if you don't have 12th grade, they'll wait to evaluate you until they can see something from 12th grade. So yeah, that's great. And so yes, everything that you did in 9th and 10th grade will matter for the US. Outside of the US, sometimes they ask for it, sometimes they don't. The second thing that you'll fill out in the profile is your test scores. So when you're doing the SAT practice on Khan Academy, you're going to fill out those last 4 math and reading and writing tests. These are my last 4 math and reading and writing tests, and you can see here that my last test score is not what my predicted test is, but that predicted over the 1,162.5, that's going to give me a good starting point for how to start looking for colleges on the website that you just saw with Michael. I'm also going to go to the IELTS in my subscores. Right here, I've got reading, listening, writing, and speaking. And I'm going to use that also when I'm looking at colleges to start to evaluate myself when I compare myself to what their profile is. After the grades and the tests, then you're going to link your leadership CV right here. I've linked my CV right here. You're going to link your personal statement that you've been working on. We've seen lots of great personal statements over the last couple weeks. And then you're going to link your major or your course. One thing about major and course here, this is where it gets a little tricky. If you're looking at different colleges around the world, this might start to change things. So for instance, if you're looking at the US, it almost doesn't really matter what you're going to put as your major or your course. You will find many of the same statistics for entering and getting scholarship. If you're looking outside the US, say in Canada, say in Europe somewhere, you might just start to see that depending on what course you put, it starts to get harder or easier to enter that particular school with scholarship or without it. So it does get a little tricky, but when I was applying to college, I wanted to go into journalism and psychology, and I actually was an English major, not a psychology major, with journalism and music. After you do that, the final section that you're going to fill out is the citizenship. And I know this is a little weird. It's both a very personal piece of information, and also we're talking about college counseling. And right now you might think, well, why does that really matter? Citizenship does make a big difference in how you read numbers in the college process. The bottom line is that when you're applying somewhere where you're not a citizen, oftentimes the numbers that you're reading, you'll have to think about them slightly differently. And vice versa, if you're a dual citizen, if you're a citizen of Canada or the US or the UK and also a Palestinian citizen or a Hawaiian holder, then the numbers that you're looking at will influence how you think about that university a little bit differently. Once you have your profile, all of those numbers and all of that information, now you're ready to start. The biggest place that I like to start.
Can I
oh yeah,
interrupt you, Mr. Chris? Sorry. I just want to emphasize that for leadership and personal statement, you put your link to your CV and your personal statement so that when Chris and Naveen are giving you college counseling, they can read your documents beforehand. Naveen, do you also want to say anything about this profile section?
There was just one small thing I wanted to add. First of all, everything Chris said is perfect. There's not much to add to that. But just one thing in regards to major. I know there has been some discussion around that, but please, when you're on any university's website that you're interested in, just check the different majors that they have, because you might think that all universities have, for example, just journalism. But no, they might have journalism and something else with it. So they always have a different range of what courses or programs they can offer. So just take a look at that. It's nice to know the options that you have. That's all I wanted to add.
Yes.
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 And actually, to build on that, one other thing to think about, as you're searching, you'll start to recognize the difference between colleges and what strong departments are where. But one of the biggest breakdowns in how people think about college is between liberal arts in the US and focused vocational schools outside. So in the US, oftentimes it's looked upon as even better to take courses outside of the thing that you're focusing on. And that's essentially the definition of liberal arts, is to get a whole view of a lot of different subjects as you're studying one subject. Whereas in certain courses, you might take business for 3 years, and most of your courses are business in Spain at a business school. And that's, to your point, Naveen, that's a big shift in thinking around college.
Woo! That is a big shift.
Big shift.
Thank you, Chris.
All right. So when I press on the different tabs in this awesome college list that Michael's made, I see a few other things too. I'm going to get to my list in a second, but first, you can go through some of these definitions that will help you when you start to research. You're going to see some of these things like need blind, demonstrated need, full demonstrated need. And you're also going to see words like considered and alternative and competitiveness as you're researching. The big takeaway here is use this definition list, and we'll keep adding to this. I'm sure as we find like other words that make a lot of sense that we see over and over, we'll keep adding to this. But the big takeaway here is that admission and scholarship are two different systems. And so when you see words like need blind or scholarship or financial aid or full demonstrated need, we're talking about scholarship, but we may not be talking about admission. When we see things like competitiveness, it's considered if you submit this, or it's not required to submit that. We're talking about admissions. We're not necessarily talking about scholarship. At the end of the day, scholarship and admission are two different systems at most universities. And so it's something to keep in mind as we go through research. Anything to add?
Naveen, would you like to?
Yeah, I just want to add something small. Everything that Chris just said in this definition information part might sound a bit scary and confusing and a bit big, but don't worry about it, because even if you don't see it now, we'll get to it later. And then again, you guys do have me and Chris and Michael to help you guys out. So don't freak out about what does this mean and that you have to know everything about it. It's just good for you guys, in case you see it, that you guys have a reference to it.
And you have your friend Google to help you understand everything. Which brings us to our next part, next tab, research. How do you research?
Yeah, that's actually a great point. As a college counselor, I use Google a lot. Honestly, I use Google for almost every question I ask. The first place, though, I think it's really important to start is with the website that you just saw Michael demonstrate. You can go to this website. You can take the score that you have in your profile, this predicted score, and you can use that to start filtering universities. If I pull up the website right here, studyabroad.com.
.ps, Chris.
.ps.
Yes.
Oops. In my 75 years of college counseling, never seen a website quite this cool. If I search, oops. Okay. And if my profile says I'm going to make 1,162, then I'm going to use that to start. So right now I'm seeing a lot of schools, but if I click everything, maybe 1,200 or below, so everything up to 1,200. It's going to filter a lot of schools for me. And I've got 208 schools. Now that's still a lot of schools, but when we consider that there are thousands of schools around the world, we've already got a very small list. And almost all of these have opportunities for financial aid or for scholarship. And so if I start there, I've already filtered out using just one criteria. Also, I'm sure people on this call are already thinking, I want to go to this region or to that region. Is there an option to sort by both the SAT and the region?
Yeah, you can click on regions, and then click on a specific place, or more like there's USA is an option. I can take a grab all US options, or you can pick a more specific, like country by country, UK, USA, Egypt, Jordan. Yeah.
So when I actually sort by the US, which has probably the most amount of universities and colleges in the world, just in one country, I have already boiled it down to 61 matches. And so this is a great place to start in my list. Using both my test scores, specifically the SAT, because we've been studying it, and you can filter by that on this website, and then also thinking about a region. If right now you're thinking, well, that's great, I'm ready to start, awesome, we'll get there in just a second. If right now you're thinking, well, I'm not entirely sure what region I want to go to, if I were you, I would actually start with the US, simply because researching schools and universities in the US will give you the most data. It doesn't mean that you're on track to go there. It simply means that if you practice researching schools in the US, or at least doing one or two at the beginning, you will find all the data that you need. Whereas if you start searching schools outside of the US, you might find some of it, but it might be really difficult to find some of that data because universities outside of the US are not as well known to publish all of the data in this college list.
I mean, do you think Chris is wrong? Yes or no?
No. I think this is very right.
Okay, that's comforting. Okay, can you elaborate on that?
Can I what?
Can you elaborate on that?
I feel attacked.
Okay. If we go to the list now and elaborate on that?
No, I guess I meant, do you have anything to add if you think Chris is correct? Do you have anything to add or build on what?
No. mean, he said everything, so no, that's perfect. Not much to add to that.
Okay.
Thank you, Naveen.
Okay.
So,
We're
Chris,
stronger together.
Team Chris.
We're doing it.
Okay.
Okay, so once I've got my profile, I've looked through the definitions, and I've thought about research. Before I go to the next set of steps for research, I want to actually take a look at the list, because a lot of this research is kind of confusing. But as you start to research, as you start to use specific links like College Board Big Future, like niche, as you start to ask other people that you know who are going to certain schools, as you start using Google, your best friend, the list itself will guide some of these questions and maybe where you start to look because of the things that you have to find and fill out on the list. So now I'm going to my list. Right now, as you can see, I've already filled out 3 different universities around the world, but just like Naveen said before, your first draft of this list really needs to be up to 12 universities. And so it will take a little time, but after you do 1 or 2, it will start to become much quicker. The first thing I'd like to do, if this makes sense to you, Naveen, and to you, Michael, is to look through what a list might look like, and then after that, we can do one together. Does that sound right?
Oh, yeah.
Cool. So right here, you can see I've got 3 different universities. The University of Tennessee, Knoxville, that's where I went to school. The University of Debrecen is in Hungary. It's well known as an old school, one of the first schools in Hungary, and also one of the only schools that teaches in English that also has a medical school that students can enter. And then the University of Toronto is probably the most popular and possibly also one of the more prestigious schools in Canada. And so when I look through those 3 schools, I can compare them on the buckets that you'll be finding and researching on this list. So the first bucket is the basic info, the who, what, where, how much, all that good stuff. We're around the world, US, Hungary, and Canada. All 3 of these are public schools. Now, this could mean something, but it might not necessarily mean something. For most of us, a public school means if we're an international, our chances decrease a little. Outside of the US, public schools are very, very popular. So at the University of Debrecen and the University of Toronto, there are large populations of international students there. Inside the US, a public school actually means that the international population is much, much smaller. And so that's something to note as the difference between the US and non-US.
Yeah, and to add on that, sorry, Chris, if you don't have a U.S. citizen, I would highly advise that you don't have a public school on your list.
Yeah, 100%. The only, and honestly, the only real exceptions to that, there are so many public schools in the U.S. The only real exceptions are the ones that are specifically saying we have made scholarship opportunities for internationals. Because if they're not saying that, to Naveen's point, then they're not prioritizing international students in any way. I see a lot of students who say, I really want to go to California and UC Berkeley or UCLA, these great schools, awesome schools. But when you look at where their students are coming from, we're looking at 90% living in California as US citizens, 5% living outside of California as US citizens, and so the final 5% are non-US citizens. And so it takes that acceptance rate of whatever it is, way, 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 often becoming more competitive than even some of the Ivy Leagues.
Wow. That's truly shocking.
Thanks for that, Michael. The next 2 sections of the college list are really important to start a conversation around money. Money is a really sensitive subject, but it's really important when we're looking at college. To go back to the definitions, probably the one definition that you'll see almost everywhere, or you'll start to think about a lot, is demonstrated need and full demonstrated need. Demonstrated need is the amount of money that you and your family demonstrate that you have to have in order to go there. Now, technically, that's going to be defined by the schools themselves. And I mean that both inside the US, and they have a very specific process we'll get into later, and also outside the US. They'll be making their decisions. The process just might not be as clear. Regardless, demonstrated need is how you demonstrate that you need the money, and full demonstrated need is essentially what we say is full ride. But when I go back to the numbers columns here, a full ride may or may not include both columns. So it's really important to know that when we talk about tuition, we're talking about how much does it cost to go to that university for 1 year, not your books, not your food, not your housing, just the university. And we talk about cost of living, we're talking about everything else. The fees, the books, the housing, maybe you live in a dorm, maybe you live off campus, maybe you have a meal plan, maybe not. Whatever it is, those two numbers together make up the full cost. Sometimes scholarships cover both, sometimes they don't. It's just good to know that you're really dealing with a lot of different numbers here. And that's why we made two columns.
Can you explain to them what's out of state and in state?
Yeah. So if you do look at public schools inside the US, even if you're a US citizen, there are going to be two prices, an out-of-state price and an in-state price. Public schools inside the United States of America charge students differently if they're living in the state. So when I was going to school, in high school, just like many of you, all of you, I was thinking, okay, well, if I go to school inside Tennessee, I pay this price right here, the in-state price. If I was living in the United States as a citizen, but I was living in New York City, I was going to pay the out-of-state price right there. So that's what in-state and out-of-state means. All internationals, someone who's not a US citizen or doesn't have a green card, they will be paying out-of-state prices. One caveat is that sometimes you can find strong public schools in the US with an out-of-state price that is about half or even less than the price of a private school. So that's something to note, but that's the difference between out-of-state and in-state. Anything to add there?
Well, that is fascinating information, Chris. I feel moved. I want to just remind our viewers, our audience, that you can pause this show and work on your list and then come back and also rewatch it later because it's filled with rich information.
That's my heart. Cool. So if you're filling out that first part and then you're coming back, let's talk about the next part, competitiveness. Competitiveness is exactly what it says here. It's what you need to get in. Now, this is the competitiveness of this university. It's not your profile. Remember, your profile is right here. It's on that first page. The competitiveness is what the university says that it wants. Now, one part of competitiveness is the major or course. The reason we put that here is that, like I said before, inside the US, whatever you put in this box won't matter quite as much, generally. Outside of the US, what you put in this box will maybe make or break where you apply. For instance, at the University of Debrecen, you're going to see that the competitiveness of medicine is much harder than the competitiveness of just a regular bachelor's degree. Inside the US, a competitiveness really depends on the university itself and how many applications it gets, what its brand name is, how competitive it is, and all that good stuff. The second column here is the average GPA. When you're looking for that particular data point, you might find it, especially in the US. I'll show you in just a second when we go through an example. You might not find it.
I was wondering why there were question marks.
I couldn't find it at the University of Debrecen.
Strange.
Strange, right? One of the things to note, because I come across this quite a bit, is like not being able to find exact data like this. Leaving a question mark is not a problem. In fact, what we'll see later on in the same section is that the University of Debrecen, let me move this out of the way, the University of Debrecen actually requires a medical school test.
Oh, wow.
Right. So, and this is a test that around the world, the vast majority of people who are taking a test like this are much older than high school graduates. So they're not really listing a GPA because at the end of the day, what you make on this medical school test is going to be the most important thing. And so that's why if I couldn't find a GPA for University of Debrecen, that's fine. Leave it out. There's probably a reason. If it comes that you consistently can't find these numbers, that's all right. Reach out first to your friends because everyone's doing this, right? All at the entire program is researching. And so I imagine some of these numbers are going to come up again and again and again. If,
Can I add something, Chris?
yeah, go ahead.
Yes, please.
This is why it's really important that we really focus on the list and try to prepare it from now, is because if they require a medical school test, there are specific dates that you can take that test. So, for example, it's possible that you have to take that test in July, and they only offer it in July and August, for example. So unless you have started your college research, you won't know that you have to take that test. And if you miss the deadline for that test, then you can't apply to that school anymore. So that's a really important thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, thanks for that,
That is
Naveen.
another gem.
And also to add on
Just a gem.
to Naveen's comment, I also want to add, medicine isn't the only one. So almost every medical school will have a medical school test, but oftentimes law schools will do the same. Sometimes, say the University of Oxford or the University of Cambridge, or even other top universities, Charles University in Prague will have an admissions test depending on the course. You might find that there's another admissions test. And I think to Naveen's point, you need to know that this early so that you can use the time of the summer, you can use the time right before next school year to start preparing those things. In fact, just to be even more specific, if you're planning on going to medical school in the UK, which right now, if you're looking for scholarship, I wouldn't advise because I don't have any data. I don't think anyone on this call right now has any data. Correct me if I'm wrong, but has any data on scholarship from the UK. But the UK medical school deadline is the earliest deadline in the world. It's October 15th every year. That means you have to have your medical school test taken and applied by October 15th. So this is why the college, to your point, Naveen, this is why the college test is so important. And then sometimes you'll find when you're looking up grades, they'll just put B+ or higher. They might put, if you're coming from the Royal Friends School and you're taking IB, they might simply say IB diploma. There's a lot of different ways that people describe the average GPA or grades. Whatever you can find is going to help you compare to other schools. Then you're going to get to SAT. You're going to see a lot of different numbers, just like Michael explained before. The 25-75% is a really good number to find. Sometimes, like at the University of Toronto, you're going to find an average. Sometimes you're going to find a not required. Remember that anytime you find a not required, there's probably something else that is required. In this case, it's a medical school test. In other cases, it might not be required, but if we want to find financial aid, we're going to need to take it and score well. So that's just something to think about.
Yes.
And then finally, the IELTS is something that you'll find almost every place. It's interesting, the University of Debrecen did not have one listed because they have a medical school test. But very, very often, even if they don't list an SAT, they will list, universities will list an IELTS score or an IELTS and a TOEFL score. And then, anything to add to competitiveness before we move on to medicine?
It's a doozy. Naveen, do you have any thoughts?
No, I mean, that covers everything. Just, like Chris said,
There seems to be some emergencies occurring around us.
you might not need all the information depending on the university, so that's fine. There's different ways that we can find the information, so don't worry about it. Fill out what you can and what you can't, and we'll figure it out.
This seems to me to be an important tidbit that Naveen just said in making your college list. Try your best to fill out every box. which
Exactly.
doesn't mean you look one time and then give up. It means you look multiple, you Google, you search, you use niche, which we didn't highlight yet, but we'll come back to in a moment, but there's search tools when we do a demonstration that you really search and try your best and don't spend hours and hours trying to fill one box. So it's okay to move on, and then in your counseling session with Chris or Naveen, you can find the information together.
The next section is pretty straightforward, the deadlines. Deadlines around the world are mostly between, between November, December, and about February. However, depending on what region, deadlines may make a lot of difference. Like I said just before, the earliest deadlines are medical school in the UK, but regular courses in the UK aren't until January 15th. So depending on your course, you may have an earlier deadline. In the US, you will see a lot of different early deadlines. On the college list, this is why this section was primarily made, is for the US. Most other places around the world have what is called regular admission deadlines. It's the deadline that you need to at least submit your original application by. Some of them may be in May, some of them may be in December, some of them in January. They run the board. But in the US, applying early is a strategy, especially when you're thinking about scholarship. So the real reason this section is important is specifically for any universities that you apply to in the US. In the US, you'll find these early deadlines, and they've been defined for you right here. First, we have early action. That's what the University of Tennessee had when I applied. It was November 1st. It was around November. It's still there, November 1st of this past year. It means you can apply to many of these schools all early. There's no commitment. There's also no commitment from them, but there's no commitment for you to take that offer if you get it. There's also something called restricted early action. It's the same kind of application. If you get in, you don't have to take it, but they also have no commitment to you. You can also usually only apply to one of these. That's why it's called restricted early action instead of just early action. Then there's these two deadlines called early decision 1 and early decision 2. They're essentially the same deadline, but they're different dates. Early decision 1 is around November, sometimes early December. Early decision 2 is usually late December or early January. Early decisions are binding agreements. They are legally binding. On the Common App or on the application that you sign, you will literally have to sign it yourself as a student. You'll have to have your parents sign it. You'll have to have your school sign it, saying that if you get in, you will commit to going. The only condition is that they also give you the full demonstrated need that you said when you applied. So going back to those definitions, full demonstrated need. Again, this is in the US. Outside the US, scholarship is a little bit more unclear. Inside the US, this is the process. When you apply early decision and they accept you, you have to take it as long as they have met your full demonstrated need.
Well, that's a big commitment.
It's a big commitment.
Wow.
Here's some overall numbers. At the end of the day, when we look at early decisions and regular decisions in terms of the amount of scholarship, sorry, did you want to say something?
No, Chris, continue. Come on.
Okay. Early decisions are far more likely to result in scholarship because universities haven't given out all the money yet.
Well, that's an important thing.
Right.
Chris, if I can interrupt, I think we could probably go into more detail about this
when we look at
in the future conversations. But this was very critical that we know when the deadlines are, and that early ones is where the money is, to put it bluntly.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chris, for that.
100%. Anything else to add, Naveen?
Oh no, did we lose Naveen? The show cannot go on without Naveen. Alhamdulillah. Did you want to add anything about deadlines?
No, the only important thing is that we will be aiming to apply for everyone early, so that's why we need to be ready by at least October 15th or October 1st. because that's the best chance that we have on scholarship. So, important deadline.
So those who have the questions, why are we doing this in May? That's why, because we want to be ready to submit the best possible thing you can submit from October 1st.
And sorry, just one more thing is that, I mean, think about it this way. If you guys are done in October, you won't be seeing any of us for all of STEM teaching, which would be great for all of you. So you should aim for that.
In our last section.
Oh yeah, our last section. Sorry, I thought you were going to take it away. Our last.
It's getting sleepy.
Our last section. It's Corona times. Our last section is about you. This is where your rationales come into play. The reason this is important is because as you're researching, you really won't have to research much of this. This is all going to come from your head, from your mind. But when you come back to this list, you want to know how they're stacking up in your mind and also how they're stacking up in the numbers. So this is really about you. For me, when I filled this out, I made sure that in the US, I was a citizen. Outside of the US, I was an international. And I gave a reason for why I'd want to apply to that college and university. Some of those reasons were about what I wanted to study. At the time, psychology, journalism, music. Some of them were about the fact that I was a good fit with my numbers. Other times, like at the University of Debrecen, I said I am interested in going into medicine, and this is the only school that I know of right now that will let me do it without learning a language or waiting for 4 years. And so, whatever the reason is, this is good to have in your list to be able to compare the universities.
It's the why. Why do I? It's the why. It's the important question.
Mm-hmm. The other really important thing about this particular section of yellow is the questions box. So any questions that you have, does this college offer opportunities to study psychology? How do I study for the medical school test at the University of Debrecen? How do I nominate myself for the international scholarship at the University of Toronto? Those questions, if you cannot answer them by looking online, and by the way, all of those questions you can answer by looking online, but if you run across questions that you cannot answer or you're just not clear on what the answer is, admissions officials love to hear from students. And so the reason that's a column is to collect all your questions so that when you actually do really think about applying to these 3 or more schools, you can find the admission contacts on the website and ask them those questions. The thing is, those questions need to be super specific, and they shouldn't be questions that you can easily find on the website, both to impress them and also so that you're not asking them to do extra work that they've already done.
Amen. Okay. Naveen, do you want to add anything about making the list so far?
Nope, that's perfect.
Well, why don't we, in our remaining time, which we need to finish soon because this show must go on, but it also must end. So let's look at 1 or 2 examples because it's also almost stuff. Let's look at a few examples. How do we research? This is a big question.
This is a big question.
You know, I want to just highlight for the group here that we made a list of how to do research, and you know, the first one is to start to identify universities based on the studyabroad.ps website, which me and Chris both showed. The second one is to do your own research to fill out the college list. The main places, Google is number 1. Number 2 is the College Board, big future search engine. And number 3 is Niche, niche.com. A lot of universities are listed on niche.com or on the College Board, and they have a lot of details just so you can see there, or you can Google it and find a lot of information.
Sorry, Michael, just to add on that. When filling out your list, you'll find all the information there. So that's why it'll be a lot easier than what it looks like.
Yeah.
And in fact, some of these sections, so the blue section is where I often use Google. So for instance, what's a university that folks might want us to look at? Maybe a private university in the US?
Why not?
Maybe the big H.
Let's go with Harvard. Everyone likes to talk about Harvard.
Yeah, okay. We like to talk about it. Let's just get on it.
No one cares about Harvard, though.
Right, seriously. We know that it's in the US. If we need to look it up on Google, we can. It's in Boston.
Chris, I was interrupted. I would like to finish one point. Can you go back, please, to the research? before we look at Harvard, I have one point I'd like to finish. You use all these resources, step 1 and 2. Step 3, if you still can't figure something out, ask other Bridge students. Ask Bridge alumni if you know them. Ask other university students you know around you. Ask other people before you contact Michael, Chris, or Naveen. Michael, Chris, or Naveen will answer many, many, many questions we already have, and we continue to answer questions. We're very happy to do that. And we don't want to answer 1 million. We want to answer like 1,000. Okay? 1,000, fine. 1 million, terrible. So please try your best to answer your own questions using the Bridge website, using Google, using College Board, using Niche, using other Bridge students, using other people you know, Bridge alumni, universities, before you ask us. This is important. Chris, I'm sorry for interrupting you, but I was interrupted. I was interrupted before that.
I know, from me.
So now you can continue.
We must always interrupt. Okay, so if we're looking something up, this blue section, oftentimes I have to use Google. So for acceptance rates, if I use Google to find Harvard's acceptance rate, I might actually just type it in, Harvard acceptance rate. It's coming up already. Don't even have to click enter. It says 5.2, right? Now, getting this exact isn't the most important part. Is 5.2 the exact acceptance rate for the year 2019-2020? I'm not sure. But it's close enough for us to start making comparisons between universities. So right now, without even clicking enter, I can go ahead back, I can enter 5.2. Cool. In the US, this is why it might be helpful to start there, even if you don't apply, because the US has a lot of data for these schools. Other places, it might be a little bit more difficult. It might not. But the US is a place where you're going to look on Google and you're going to find something like that pop up even before you press enter. Tuition, oftentimes I'll do the same thing, Harvard tuition. And what will come up may be an answer, like you see here, or, I'm going to change it to English, or I can also look at Harvard's website. Almost the first thing that pops up when you type in something like Harvard or Harvard University or the name of a college and tuition is the website. This is a great place to go and actually learn because they're going to give you the most the most recent numbers that they have. Anything to add to that?
I would like to demonstrate something that will happen.
Yes.
If you ask us a question that's very easily Googleable, this is what you will get from us. Let me Google that for you. LMGTFY. You will receive this. This is google.com. If your question. Click the button. Then you click the button, and then you get the search. And then you can find the answer, 5.8%. Okay? So let's make sure that we're modeling this now, and Chris is doing that. And to see if we can actually find almost all the information, very simple questions, very easily by looking at it.
Well, let me ask Chris a question. As if I was a student, if I Googled how much the tuition was, and I checked it on 3 different websites, and the 3 different websites gave me different numbers, what should I do?
This is a good question. I think the website to believe is the website of the university. Right. So if you can find it on the university's website, great. Believe that. Don't believe anyone else. It's probably also updated more often. B, also, one of the things that you'll find, I did go ahead and write, here, I'll go ahead and share my screen again. You took away my screen share.
I am the host of this show.
I feel like the taco is going off of it.
I can share a screen whenever I want.
Right here, I see this number right here is coming from Harvard, but it's an old number. It's 2018-19, not 2019-20 or 2021. And yet, that number is still useful to compare. So if you just can't find it, adding that number in is still going to be really useful to compare tuitions. If you look already, we've got multiple different tuitions. Public schools in the US are significantly less. Even public schools outside of the US can be way less. University of Jefferson as a medical school is only about $15,000. University of Toronto is slightly less, but not much, right? So I think the exact numbers often don't matter as much as the trends. Yeah. Yeah. Nothing. Same thing when you look up the cost of living, or when you look up the books and the fees, you can type that straight into Google. I'm gonna do a quick, just to finish this video, I'm gonna do a quick prediction around Boston. The Boston area per year is gonna be somewhere in the family of $15,000. It's a lot of money that we're looking at. So I imagine many of us are thinking, well, I'm going to need a scholarship. And that's totally fine to think. It's just good to have those numbers in front of us.
This talk show, we've currently run out of time. So I'm wondering, are there other major things we want to show our listeners and viewers, our very dear listeners and viewers? Do we want to show them anything specific before we?
The last piece I will say is most of the rest of the sheet outside of the blue is actually very straightforward. The competitiveness, besides the course, the competitiveness can almost all be found on the website that you originally showed. Mm-hmm. So the studyabroad.ps will give you the IELTS score, will often give you the SAT range, will give you whether or not the SAT 2 is required, recommended, considered, all that good stuff. If you look at the website that Michael originally showed you, you will find a lot of the information around competitiveness. You look on the websites of the schools, you'll find the deadlines. And then when you get to the yellow, it's all about you.
Amen, it's all about you. I want to just show really quick Niche, which is a nice website, niche.com, to search colleges. I'm going to search my college I went to, Boston College. Open it up. It has a little pretty picture of it. I don't remember it being that pretty. It was mostly cold. So don't ever assume the pictures are telling the truth, because they're not. Oh, look, it has an A+ grade. That's sweet. Little summary, website, ranking.
Did you really go there?
I did go there. I'm so smart. Not really that smart, but that's okay. Okay, anyway, admissions. We get some data. We can even see your chances, see how high the GPAs are, how high the SAT scores are in general, and people that are getting in, people accepted, rejected, people considering, the cost breakdown. You basically get almost all the information you need right here from niche.com. So, Niche, this website is an amazing, and here's the tuition and all this stuff. So, or earnings, and here's reviews, people talking about the university. So this is a great place to get a lot of the detailed information. Our website is like the starting point, and then Niche is a really good one to follow up. Also, the College Board Big Future. Let's take a really quick look at that. From this site, you're also going to have to look up the universities and get probably the similar information that you would get from Niche. Let's just look at Boston College again. Here we go.
And I think the two things that are different about these two websites versus Google is that they've done a lot of the legwork to find this information, where Google hasn't.
Exactly. Look here, deadlines, campus life, applying, paying for literally a category for international students. Look at this. TOEFL, where IELTS requirement, well, it says TOEFL, we have to find out that they also take IELTS. So these websites are going to be where you're going to get a lot of your information. January 1st deadline, boom, very easy. Naveen, I want to invite you in. We've heard a lot from Mr. Chris today. Do you want to share any personal advice, wisdom, feelings, thoughts?
Yeah, so the main advice that I would give is please add random 12 universities on your list, because it won't help the students and it won't help. Please take this list very seriously. Think about universities that you're actually interested in. And like I said, we're trying to get a range of state schools, math schools, and top schools. So it's not just the first 12 universities that pop out, let's put them on this list and it's a task and we're over with. This is a task. This is more of like a guide for the students to use to help them. Because I'm not getting anything out of it, Chris isn't getting anything out of it, neither is Michael. So unless you truly want to go to these universities, you're really interested in what they have to offer, you've actually ask your parents, maybe I can pay $2,000 a year, or maybe I can't pay anything. Like, these are all really important questions, and this is why the list is there, and this is why it exists. It exists to help you think of what questions you need to ask and why you need to ask them, and just to help, get you into the university that hopefully, you'll get into. So if you take it as a task, no one's going to benefit from it. Take it as a guide, and we're here to support. That's it.
Yes, yes. This is good. Thank you for saying that. As a way to close out, I want to just review what the follow-up is for you on this, the next steps. So in the May through June work, you've just finished watching the show. The show will close in a moment. And you've been following along on your own college list document. Next, you're going to complete this survey. In this survey, you're going to put your name, and then you're going to tell us which information session you signed up for. How did you feel after watching the video? Anywhere from confused to understanding. And then what questions do you have? Write all your questions here, because we're going to use those for the Q&A sessions. We will have Q&A sessions coming up very soon. You're going to open this link here to sign up for a Q&A session. You see that. This is the Bridge Meeting sign up doc. You're going to go to Q&A info session and then put your name. Any of these blank yellow spaces, if it's blank, you can put your name. Please don't write over anybody else's name or delete anyone. Everyone is required to attend at least one. You're welcome to come to all of them or more than one if you like, but everybody come to at least one on Zoom, and you'll be able to ask questions to me and Christine about everything you've seen. After that, then you'll start working on your own list. Once you have your own draft list, you sign up for your first one-on-one meeting with Chris or Naveen to discuss that list. Now, I am just overjoyed that we've had these guests with us today, Chris and Naveen. I mean, really special stars in the universe. I mean, we're all stardust, but Naveen and Chris, I think they're more. They're stars, not just stardust.
We're burning balls of gas. Is that what you're saying?
You're definitely a burning ball of gas, Chris. That's for sure. Say the smell has been a burning ball of gas in this room. So
how can you smell me, Michael?
Chris, point there. So I'm in space. I'm not near you. So with that, I think we're ready to close. I want to hear just one sentence to close out from Chris and Naveen, that you want to leave our bridge students with. Anybody can go first.
I'll go first. You can do it.
Woo! College is numbers plus personality. This is the numbers.
That was deep. I know you can. With that, we're going to say goodbye. It has been such a Thank you.
اغلب الازواج بتنامش على نفس الفراش على الايفون سيريز وتحريز اغلب الحلايب لانها عرب منك الهجري بعد بلاقي حالي حاليا احتلال